Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Brown. Uh, been a while since I've posted anything up on this channel. The talk today is a bit of a request from a friend of mine that's in Russia and basically wanted to see what I was doing in terms of balance and economy inside of games. I guess for certain reasons. And because of that, I went through and I couldn't find the old balance and economy presentation that I gave inside of my class last semester. So I thought, okay, let's just redo it from scratch because why not have some fun and do a lecture? Okay, balance and economy in games. So this is a very large issue inside of a lot of games, especially inside of multi-user dungeons where you have some issues. So we're going to talk about that. So to start off with, what do we kind of understand about economy in games? So usually you have something that it acts as a monetary system within a game. This can either be explicit. This could be, for example, like coins, gold, simoleons, some form of currency within the game. Or there is also implicit versions of monetary systems. So by implicit, this is not like something that is specifically a medium of trade. So this could be barter. Stones of Jordan inside of Diablo 3 became this because they only had a barter system. So some sort of measurement in terms of the unit of account inside of it. And how do we do this in terms of trade? This is particularly important inside of multi-user dungeons. So in this case, there usually is some sort of tie between real world money and game currency. And in fact, EVE Online is probably the one that is most cited in terms of the economist side of this because they have an economist that works full-time on the game. So there is a games central banker that works on that system. Game leveling systems can also be seen somewhat as being a monetary system within the game. So if we look at, for example, Payday 2, there's perks and weapons that can be purchased with in-game currency, but there's also experience points that can serve in these functions and allow you to get different weapons inside of the game. And there are ways that experience points also kind of serve this sort of function. Okay. So we're going to go into some quick monetary policy and quantity theory here. So this is coming out of more of the economics textbooks than inside of the computer science textbooks. And what we can see here is that we have these kind of balancing equations inside of monetary policy. And the first one is basically price by quantity of available goods has to equal the amount of money in circulation times the velocity in the money supply. That is how often a transaction is made. So we have price, which is basically how much does the thing cost. We have M, which is the total money in circulation within our economy. And then we have the velocity in the money supply. So that's how often is a transaction made. So am I going to the store every single day and buying something and selling something? Or do we have something that's very illiquid? There's an inability to make a trade because nobody else wants to have a trade happen by the quantity of available goods. So what we can say is that the price of an object, another way of putting this is the price of an object is equal to the amount of money that's in circulation times the velocity of the money supply over the quantity. So what is this saying? Well, if you have more of a good, what's going to happen? We can see that if you have more of a good holding everything else, cerebus paribus, equivalent, then price should go down. That basically meets with our expectations. But we can see here, if there's more money in circulation, prices have to go up. You basically have more of the thing to buy things, prices will go up. Also, if there's an increase in the velocity of the money supply, so that is we're trading very often, prices will also go up holding everything else equal. Why would that happen? Well, if you think about it, if more people are going to the store and purchasing objects, what's happening in terms of the quantity of available goods? What's happening in terms of that? We're getting a lot of turnover in the economy. More people have money to spend. So really, it's kind of almost increasing the amount of actual seen money in the system. Okay, so this has to basically even out at some point. So how does this affect wealth? So wealth is basically what do I have in terms of total assets, in terms of the amount of money that I have in the bank, in terms of, how expensive is my clothing if I was to go to sell it. If I was to take everything I own and sell it tomorrow, that would be considered my asset level. Now, I can also be negative on that too, right? If I had a whole bunch of debts, if I sold everything, I could be in debt and have a negative level. So a change in price, we know, is from those equations, is a change in the money supply by velocity over the quantity of goods available in the system. So we know that money in circulation increases prices. We know more in transactions will increase prices. And we know that more quantity of goods will decrease prices from that equation. This is then leading into how do we get inflation? Okay, so what is inflation in this case? So inflation is a sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. So we are looking at a few things here. We're first looking at the price level has to be increasing, inflating. If it's going down, then it will be deflation. So the general price level has to be going up, and it's over a certain period of time. So this isn't in the course of a day, I see two objects, and I go to two different stores, and the one has it more expensive than the other. That's not inflation. Inflation would be day to day at that same store, that price of that object is getting increasingly higher and higher and higher. Item costs increase as the currency value decreases. So if my dollar, if my simoleon, if my ruble is not worth as much, then the way that shops will deal with that is increases to the cost of the goods. They want more for that object. So economists often link hyperinflation to over increases in the monetary supply within a system. Many actions inside of a multi-user dungeon increase the amount of currency within the system. Okay. And this is also known as multi-user dungeonflation or mudflation. So one of the ways that we deal with this inside of video games is we control the goods. So quantity of types of goods and circulations can be controlled very easily by us as programmers. Merchants can increase the amount of goods or change goods for sale. Drop rates on items can be increased or decreased. But the problem here is that loot is mechanical, and some items should be scarce inside of our system. So we have a bit of a problem here, because if we're controlling goods, then we're also controlling one of the ways that we kind of reward players within our game. The other way that we can deal with this is controlling the flow of money. Let's just make it harder to move money around. So we could put in controls by the velocity amount of money in the system, right? Maybe we prevent people from taking money out of the bank. Maybe we prevent them from moving it outside of certain areas, right? Maybe there's certain monies that only work in certain areas of the game. Okay, if we control this, we've got some problems here, right? People don't really like these types of controls on the flow of what they consider to be their money. So in general, we're looking at a diagram that looks like this. We have players controlling the flow in. And the way that we deal with this from the game mechanics is we have to somehow force the flow out. How do we get people to basically spend the money that they are being given within the game system? So one of the ways is we can deal with character assets. Okay, so economics works at a number of levels of money in the monetary system. The most simplistic version is what's known as the M1 money supply. So that's all money in cash, checking accounts, and all liquid assets. So basically, if you can go to the bank right now and withdraw that money, or maybe it's in some stocks and you have access to the stock market and you can sell the stock and get the money from that stock, or you have some bonds, you can go and you can sell the bond. Maybe you have it in gold and you can go and sell the gold very quickly, right? Very quickly turn it into cash money that can be used. That's M1. That's the M1 money supply. That is normally what we're kind of dealing with as the general population. However, for a player inside of a game, pretty much everything is in the sort of M1 money supply. We can see this is all money that the character has on hand, all items on the person that can be sold, and all items in any storage boxes that can be sold to a vendor. Okay, so how do we deal with the kind of pushing of money into the system? Well, monsters are our biggest source. So player kills a monster, monster drops money, monster drops item, item is then sold for money. Very simplistic model. Quests. Okay, so quests reward the character with some money or an item, which could then be sold for money. So we're all looking at this as being increases in the money supply. Treasures, this is just found money or items. Those again put money into the system. So this is just basically creating money. So we can almost see this as a central bank going to the printing press and saying, hey, let's just run the printing press. And so that's what we're kind of dealing with. We're acting as kind of the central bank inside of our own game. NPC shopkeepers, right? They have very little ability in a way to say, no, I have enough rat pelts today. Thank you. I will not buy them. Because players feel very much cheated out of their time when this sort of system is utilized. Conversely, it's due to this that the currency can flood the system, right? We have this idea of farming for gold. And we can see this inside of, actual systems where gold can be transformed into human currencies, because we have, for example, in China, they will have people that just play video games all day in order to farm gold that they can then be bought for real money. Money and item rewards are often given to players to counter measurable to the risk that they put in. So this is basically going back to, again, basic economic theory that risk is equal to reward, that a higher level player deserves more money for their efforts. Now, there's a lot of, luckily, currency neutral actions inside of games. So if a player transfers some items, that is currency neutral inside of our system. It doesn't change the amount of money inside of the system. Gambling between players. This might even include something like pulling money out if the house of the gambling takes a cut. Okay. So what we're really dealing with is there's lots and lots and lots of ways that we have toggles on putting money into the system. We have very few to take it out. And as money goes into the system, the value of that money decreases. So we end up with something known as hyperinflation. Okay. This is where we begin to look at real world examples like Germany post-World War I inside the Weimar Republic, or Zimbabwe just recently in the 1990s, all the way up to the late noughties in terms of this. And Diablo 3 all had these types of hyperinflational issues inside of their systems. So if we look here at the Weimar Republic, that guy's off to buy bread. So this is an outcome of World War I. Germans were forced to repay allies for the costs of the war in terms of this. And the best way that they figured out that they could repay the allies is let's just print a bunch of money. This is not a great solution, as the Weimar Republic was to learn, because a loaf of bread that beforehand cost 1 mark, 3 years later on that same date, the loaf of bread was worth 1 million marks. So this is one of the higher measurable inflation rates. Zimbabwe here. So here we can see a starving billionaire. And in fact, I have a $1 trillion Zimbabwe bill that I won at a raffle at a coin show as a door prize. So I'm actually a trillionaire in Zimbabwe, if that meant anything. So due to this governmental change, confiscation of property, and wars, they ended up having one of the highest measured inflational rates. It was up to, at one point, 75 billion% over the time period of a year. So that means if you had 75 billion Zimbabwe dollars, it would have the same purchasing price as $1 by the end of the year. Government then attempted to fix prices and stop citizens from using other currencies. They made it illegal to raise prices, so people stopped selling. They made it illegal to use other currencies, so prices began to be quoted inside of Zimbabwe dollars, but quickly were converted into other currencies. In fact, there are stories out of Weimar Germany in which people would actually be paid at the start of the day. They would go out and buy, whatever they needed to buy, and then they would come back and work for the rest of the day. Because over that day, the value of the money had dropped so much that there was no point in hiring someone to work for you. The currency officially collapsed in 2009. There was reports of bread being exchanged for gold, and other currencies have basically now been brought in and used inside of Zimbabwe in order to fix this immense crisis in terms of this, because this has massive economic problems, which we'll get into. And we'll use the lens of Diablo 3. This is one example from a player. He says, I purchased most of my gear for about 5 million gold early on. I've been farming for a while and have saved about 30 million gold, but now I can't upgrade from the gear that I have. Where is all this money coming from? Why is everything so expensive? So in this case, he purchased all of this and his purchasing power has dropped to 0 through it because the currency has completely eroded in terms of its purchasing value. One of the important things that a currency has to have is the fact that day to day, it's not continuously dropping in value, that it still has a maintenance of it. Blizzard just announced the drop rates for certain items are going to be doubled. If you haven't already, you should consider you're converting your current gear into cash, since real dollars are the best hedge against gold devaluation. And for those of you that are just kind of coming to this idea of economics right now, this is a bit of a joke, especially because usually people say that gold is the best hedge against dollar devaluation. So it's kind of an inverted process saying, hey, the dollar is actually better at holding its value than gold in Diablo. And there's the link to that. Okay. So what are the issues here? Well, one, it penalizes new players. So older players have usually kept up with currency changes. They usually have a very high savings rate in terms of the game. And we can also see this with, for example, people as well, right? If you're older, you're probably more likely to have your money inside of assets that are appreciating in value, like houses or stocks or something else where you're keeping your money where things are going to go up with this inflation rate to kind of counterbalance it. But people just coming into the system, the youth, are harmed. They've had a real reduction in wages as it drops. So wages are not going to keep up with that levels of inflation. It just cannot. Inside of a game, inside of an MMO, we have way more controls over the world than a lot of central banks would. So one of the ways that we can deal with this is we can actually pull money out of the system, out of the box. One of the ways that we can do that is taxes, either general or specific. So this could be direct taxes. So we basically just tax people's wealth, or we have guild costs, or we have land costs, or we have lotteries, something that basically is taking money out of the hands of the players in some manner. We can also do fee for services. We can have item repairs that things, degrade over time. And so because of that, we pull money out. We can have penalties on death, item destruction, percentage fee for resurrection, item, damage, some sort of system that requires people to, pay for the fact that they've been killed within the game. We can have rakes, so maybe gambling or auction house fees inside of, some sort of auction house. That really often happens inside of World of Warcraft, for example, where there's a certain cut. That's why they're doing that. They're actually trying to make an expense on the transaction, because remember, the frequency of transactions also affects this rate. So we're trying to also prevent that. Consumables in terms of our characters, ammunition, food for players or animals, potions, temporary buffs, or power-ups. Or we can also make it so if you pick up a certain item and you utilize it, you're unable to transfer it for currency, like soul binding. You can only improve or remove one of those. Okay. Now, remember that we talked about the issue of older players within the game are going to be wealthier for a lot of reasons, and so we have to kind of target them as well. So this is where we get into kind of the aesthetic mods to it. These usually target the very rich players. This is looking at aesthetic character modifications to items. This could be like personal item naming or color and palette changes, rebuilding the character's look, renaming the character. Usually those will have some sort of in-game fees associated with them. And this is one of the reasons to kind of like pull that money out. Or developer run auctions, right? Naming rights over lands. I've seen that, nice pair of shades to put on your character or something like that, you can pull that out. A bunch of other games have also looked into connections to other currency to maintain values. There we see this, for example, in the real world, that a lot of currencies are actually not free floating. They will peg to someone else. This is usually due to some sort of either, economic cultural reason. Like, for example, the Danish krone, even though it is a separate currency from the euro, it is pegged to the euro at a certain maintainable rate because they're inside of the Eurozone. So even though they want to maintain their own banking policy to a certain extent, they're allowing it to float with the euro rather than that. China also does this quite a bit. Is this manipulating currency? Yeah. It's changing the value of the currency somehow. So this allows for items or playtime to be bought with real money. That's one way that you can peg it. So really what happens there is if the game currencies ever go above a certain amount, then great. Instead of paying your 1995 this month, you pay it within world gold, and that will actually act as a natural way to do transfers between in-game currency and real currency without having to provide that mechanism. It may not be legal in certain areas now to allow game currencies to be transferred for real currencies, but hey, we're going to, ignore your fees for a month, probably is okay. So this now sets an exchange rate from in-game currency to real currency, because now what happens is there's a way to transfer between in-game currency into I saved so much real currency against it. So now you've kind of put a value on what is the in-game currency to a real currency without expressly allowing for that transmission. So game currency and items can never hit a floor or move too high, because I can always buy that real world item at that fixed cost. So the game is kind of pegged. So I can make this, 3 months of play is 1995 or 1 million in-game currency, whatever that is. EVE Online, for example, uses this system. We talked a little bit about them earlier. Money inside of there is literally gained via mining, or it's just floating about. So they have a free market NPC economy. So, like this is to deal with their rat pal engines. I can only give you a very small amount, so people are more likely to just throw them away. They have lots of item sinks inside of there. Ship destruction is permadeath for the ship. Items aboard are lost, but you can buy insurance policies for a percentage of the value of what your ship cargo is. And that's really a tax in this case, right? Because it's pulling it into, the insurance company is actually just the gods of the game. Player versus player combat is very much encouraged. Wars between factions are rewarded via ownership of various sectors, and pirates can, make prey of various collector ships that are going out and doing things via mining. So because of that and the war, it destroys various economic ownership and goods inside of the thing. If you want to destroy anything when it comes to economics, war will destroy everything. So inflation is therefore controlled by a mix of war, tax, and currency inside of EVE Online. Players can buy extensions to their accounts via the real world or in-game currency, so they therefore have a peg of the ISK inside of EVE into the real world. So I hope that's a little bit illuminating on the various types of methodologies inside of video games that you can use in order to avoid horrible hyperinflation systems.